This 16-year-old was sentenced to 50 years in prison, and you won't believe what he did. In 2022, Noah Ney shot a 5-year-old girl in the neck and shoulder in Oklahoma. This teen, who I swear looks like a 9-year-old, was riding in a stolen car and purposely shot inside a home where the little girl was playing. But again, this was no accident. No one did this for a gang initiation. Luckily, the little girl survived, but had the bullet hit a spot an inch away, she would have definitely died. Noah was arrested, but not long after, he escaped the juvenile detention center by jumping a fence. He was found 4 days later, but when he was put back into the detention center, he repeatedly assaulted staff. Noah was sentenced as an adult, but the judge said that in 2028, his sentence can be reduced if he's proved that he's changed.
I swear the creepiest stuff always happens in hospitals. So Katrina was a nurse in the pediatric oncology part of the hospital, and she was looking after this one little boy that was in rough shape. It seemed like his treatments weren't working anymore, but despite all this, he stayed in pretty good spirits. And he would always wear his Spider-Man costume. Like every day, always in the Spider-Man costume. Sadly, the little boy eventually passed away from his cancer. But then, a few months later, a teen boy gets admitted down the hall. And this was after the little boy had already passed away, so there was no overlap between the two. This boy was also in pretty rough shape and his treatments weren't working anymore. But then one night, a nurse hears him talking to someone inside of his room, but there's no one there. So the nurse goes in to see who he's talking to, and she can't believe what he says. The teen said he just saw a little boy dressed as Spider-Man in his room talking to him. And this little boy was telling him all about Marvel and all about how much he loves Spider-Man. The teen boy ended up passing away a few weeks later, but that story always stuck with the nurses.
A few years after killing Jason Voorhees with a machete, Tommy Jarvis started to have recurring nightmares about the violent serial killer. As a result, he was sent to several psychiatric hospitals, before settling finally at Pinehurst Halfway House. Inmate Joey Burns was killed by fellow inmate Vic Farron not long after Tommy's arrival. A series of murders then happened in the local area when a couple of greasers were killed, followed by a diner waitress and her boyfriend the following night. Local Sheriff Carl Tucker believed that Jason Voorhees was once more alive and committing the murders. The following day, Raymond Joffrey was killed, followed soon after by Tina McCarthy and Eddie Kelso. This was followed by the deaths of Demon Winter and his girlfriend, Ethel and Junior Hubbard, Jake Patterson, Robin Brown, and Violet Moraine. The killer soon revealed himself, and lo and behold, it was Jason in his hockey mask. Or was it? After a battle with Tommy, Jason was thrown out of a loft window and landed on a bed of spikes and died. Upon removal of the hockey mask, the killer was revealed to be Roy Burns, Joey's father, not Jason. After the massacre at Higgins Haven, the body of serial killer Jason Voorhees was taken to the Wessex County morgue. Despite being hit in the head with an axe, Jason woke up and killed both the coroner and a nurse. He left the morgue and headed back to Crystal Lake. Conveniently, a fresh group of teenagers were making their way to Camp Crystal Lake on a weekend getaway. They spotted a hitchhiker on their way but didn't have any room in the car. Soon after they drove past, the hitchhiker was stabbed in the neck and killed by Jason. Upon their arrival at Crystal Lake, the teens had a party, as you do, which naturally didn't go down well with Jason. He then proceeded to kill Samantha, Paul, Terry, Mrs. Jarvis, Jimmy, Tina, Ted, Doug, Sarah and Rob. There's Rob there, bottom right. A showdown between Tommy, Jason and Trish led to Tommy shaving his head, in the hope that Jason would think it was himself as a child and confuse him. It did. Trish hit Jason and his mask fell off. Tommy then drove a machete through his skull. Surely that was the end of Jason.
New things and shit. And this video shows a group of over 40 Golden Corral customers in a massive brawl over a steak shortage at a Pennsylvania location. Police are still investigating to see who threw the first punch. A chicken recently broke into the United States Pentagon before being caught and taken into custody. The Pentagon refuses to release any info on how the hen got in and any secrets it may have discovered. A woman named Darylyn Roberts was recently arrested after pretending to be a sign language interpreter on live TV. I don't know how, but she was on live TV multiple times before someone realized that she was just doing random hand motions. A British dog named Millie got stuck in a mud flat near the ocean with the tide quickly rising. Fortunately, authorities rushed to help using a drone with a sausage tied to it to lead the small dog to safety. Elon Musk himself recently reached out to a teenager who runs a Twitter account that tracks and publishes the location of Musk's private plane. Elon offered the kid $5,000 to shut it down until the kid replied, "How about 50?"
Imagine a teacher at your middle school sending inappropriate pictures on Snapchat and abusing children. Cassidy Krause is a 24-year-old teacher from a school in Iowa. Despite her being listed on Facebook as being married after getting married in July, there are disturbing reports emerging. She was recently arrested and charged with S abuse after sending obscene materials to a minor. It's believed that she sent inappropriate material to students via Snapchat, and she has resigned from her role at the school. She's accused of SAing at least 3 students while employed by the school, the youngest student being just 13 years old. Court records show that her husband filed for divorce from her on the 28th of August. She currently faces up to 33 years in prison if convicted. It's reported that she has posted a $10,000 bond and has been released from jail for now. She is scheduled to return back to court on Thursday. She is yet to enter a plea. There has been a mass shooting in Indianapolis at a Halloween party. Police received multiple phone calls about a large party after midnight on Sunday the 29th of October. When authorities responded to the scene to disperse the party, they heard gunshots. A large crowd started running from the area. Tragically, a 16-year-old girl was pronounced dead at the scene and 9 others were injured. The victims' ages are believed to be between 16 and 22 years old. All 9 survivors were rushed to local hospitals and are in a stable condition. Reportedly, the party had several hundred people and 6 firearms were found at the crime scene. The promoter of the party is believed to have been inviting people to attend via Snapchat and Cash App. Police are begging anyone with any information to come forward and help them with the investigation. The deputy stated no one deserves to die at 16 years old because they go to a party. They said, "We're going to do everything as a law enforcement agency to do our part, but we need you to do your part."
Gruesome sports injuries that traumatize fans, Part 2. In 2017, Akil Mitchell took an awkward fall during which his eye completely popped out of its socket. Miraculously, he regained his vision about a month later, but now is forced to play with protective glasses. Paul George was playing in a 2014 Team USA scrimmage when he jumped up to block a layup. On the way down, his foot landed awkwardly against the hoop's pole and his lower leg horrifically snapped in half. In the Olympic qualifiers, French gymnast Samir Ait Said landed badly after a huge vault, causing his left leg to break in multiple places. In 1985, quarterback Joe Theismann was sacked, completely busting his right leg in half. 33 years later, on the same team in the same city in basically identical parts of the field, a player named Alex Smith suffered an equally disturbing injury to his right leg. The final score of both games, 23-31.
People now think there's drone footage that confirms that this ghost is real. Oh my god. So since the 1980s, locals in Cannock Chase in the UK have claimed to see the ghost of a black-eyed little girl in the woods. Multiple witnesses have reported seeing a little girl with soulless black eyes and a crooked neck popping out of the woods. Some say she's searching for her mother, and others say that she feels demonic. But now reports are saying that a drone may have caught a photo of her. This is the image that was captured this week, and people are saying they think this is the girl. Here's a close-up image of it where you can see her hair, you can see her crooked neck, and you can see the black eyes. But what do you think? Is it her?
Imagine starting to date a new guy, all is going well, and a month later he murders you with an ice pick. Katie Pham and Daniel Gunnarsson had been dating for around a month. Prior to the tragic event, friends of the Californian pair had been growing in concern at Daniel's behaviour. It was reported he started showing animosity towards his 21-year-old girlfriend. It was the 18th of May 2021 and Daniel went to his stepdad's home in Ridgecrest. When he arrived, he confided in him around his failing relationship. He then called Katie and arranged to pick her up. He then drove her back to his dad's house. He led Katie to the garage where the unthinkable happened. It wasn't until painters arrived at the house that the horrific scene was discovered. Now, it's reported that the painters had actually heard a woman screaming, but it wasn't until an hour later that they opened the garage and found a hideous scene. They found Katie dead, partially unclothed and lying face down, and David covered in blood. Police were called and David was charged with murder. Evidence from the scene showed that David had put gloves on and used a 24-inch long ice axe to attack Katie. Once she was deceased, he SA'd her. He was given 25 years to life in prison, plus an additional 2 years and 4 months.
This pedophile mom in Ohio committed one of the most horrific crimes I've ever read about. I'm going to add a trigger warning in here right now. This is a very, very disturbing story, so viewer discretion is advised. So this is Ashley Jessup from Ohio. And in 2012, she was found guilty of rape and sentenced to life in prison. But who did Ashley assault? Well, it was her own 10-month-old baby. At the time of this crime, Ashley was dating 24-year-old Jordan Russell. The two seemed to be very in love, and they frequently exchanged explicit materials over email and text message, of themselves, obviously. But then in August of 2011, Jordan asked Ashley to do something shocking. He asked her to perform explicit acts on her own 10-month-old baby son. And obviously he wanted her to film it and send it to him so he could keep these videos and images. And for some shocking reason, Ashley actually obliged, and she performed graphic and gruesome acts on her own son. So later that month, Jordan had actually broken up with Ashley, and he already had a new girlfriend. And this new girlfriend of Jordan's was going through his computer when she discovered these extremely disturbing images and contacted the police. So obviously when the details of this case were made public, everybody was absolutely shocked. And the judge in this case actually stated that in his 30-year career, this was one of the most bizarre and disturbing cases he had ever had to cover. So Ashley was eventually convicted of a litany of charges, including assault, rape on a minor, everything like that. And she's still in prison to this day, serving out that life sentence. Now, this is a really, really disturbing story, and I really do think that she should be in prison for a very, very long time.
These are haunting pictures of people moments before their death. This is Roman Gonzalez, a Puerto Rican singer with a huge fan base. He had millions upon millions of listeners worldwide. Early in 2014, he was involved in a motorbike crash with another vehicle, resulting in his death at the age of 27. The picture you see on the screen right now was taken by Roman moments before the accident killed him. It's unknown whether this selfie was a factor in his death, but literally moments after this picture was taken, his life ended. He was just enjoying his day, not thinking about dying at all. It goes to show that you have to sit back and take everything in once in a while. Next up is a photo of Petra and Gary Slock. Now, this photo wouldn't be eerie at all if it wasn't taken on the doomed Malaysia Airlines flight MH17. This plane was allegedly shot down by pro-Russian separatists on July 17, 2014, leading to an ongoing international investigation. Everyone on board flight MH17 was killed in the attack. Gary Slock and his mother Petra Slock took this photo right before takeoff, making them among the victims of the tragedy. May they rest in peace. Next up is the last photo ever taken of Princess Diana. The death of Princess Diana might be one of the most controversial deaths in history because there's a lot of uncertainty surrounding her car crash, and many people think it was a cover-up, and many others think she was killed by the high-ups in England. This photo was taken by one of the paparazzi photographers in front of the vehicle only moments before the fatal crash. So, what do you think happened? This is Pavel Kashin, who is a freerunner. He would often perform jaw-dropping stunts with friends in dangerously high places. But unfortunately, Pavel made a fatal error during one of his sessions. This photo shows Pavel just moments after he lost his balance after landing a backflip off the wall. He then died after falling 16 stories. I would never understand parkour and free running for this exact reason, but people like to do what they like to do. May Pavel Kashin rest in peace. You won't believe what these parents did to their daughter, and before I begin, this is a massive trigger warning. This is Lacey Fletcher, and her parents let her rot away on their sofa in her own waste up to 12 years. 36-year-old Lacey Fletcher's body was found fused to the couch. Lacey was semi-naked and sitting upright in a sunken crevice in the sofa when she was found by police officers. She weighed 96 pounds and was covered in urine, feces, and maggots. Lacey was homeschooled since high school, suffered social anxiety, and had a severe case of Asperger's. But what makes this case so sinister is that Lacey had locked-in syndrome, which is when you're completely aware of everything going on around you, but you can't move any parts of your body except your eyes, and you can't talk. Meaning Lacey was sitting in this same position for 12 years in her own feces, urine, and maggots, completely aware of what's going on around her, but there's nothing she could do about it. All while her parents are living in the same house as her as she rots away. When the officers reached the house, they said the stench was so strong it almost made them puke. Lacey's body was completely surrounded and covered in feces and urine, and there were also severe ulcers on the body's underside. Her body also appeared completely rotten to the bone. She also appeared to have feces shoved in her face, chest, and stomach. But the sad thing about this case is that Lacey Fletcher's parents just completely gave up on her. Since she had locked-in syndrome, they just placed her on the couch and let her sit there for years on years on years, barely feeding her and never cleaning her. Her parents were in this house showering, cooking, and just relaxing, all while their daughter was rotting away slowly on the couch because of them. Can you just imagine having locked-in syndrome and being placed on a couch by your parents, and then you get neglected, starved, and ignored for years, and all you can do is just think in your own head about what's going on? Lacey could never ask her parents what they were doing because she couldn't talk. So you could only imagine the fear and anxiety Lacey was feeling throughout the 12 years she was stuck on the couch. This is one of the most sickening and inhumane cases ever, and may Lacey rest in peace.
I must admit, I have been putting this one off. Arthur's story does need to be told, but having a son the exact same age as Arthur was when he died, it's been absolutely heartbreaking researching his story. Trigger warning, as always, some of the details are quite hard to listen to. Arthur actually lived with his mother Olivia until early 2019. She described him as the light of her life, but she did have problems with alcohol and would often argue with men that she was seeing. One of those men was Gary Cunningham. Ironically, they met at an alcohol awareness course and began seeing each other, but their relationship was extremely violent and toxic. In February 2019, one evening after they'd been drinking, they got into an extremely violent argument, and Olivia grabbed a kitchen knife and stabbed Gary multiple times, killing him. She was sentenced to 18 years for manslaughter, which meant that Arthur then had to go and live with his father, Thomas Hughes. Just over a year later, Arthur was murdered. In April 2019, Thomas met a woman on a dating app, and he quickly introduced her to Arthur. Emma Tustin had her own place, while Thomas and Arthur were actually living in an annex behind Thomas's parents' house. And when the COVID-19 pandemic hit and the UK went into lockdown, Thomas took Arthur and they moved in with Emma. Just before his school closed due to lockdown, Arthur's teacher had actually expressed some concerns about his behaviour. She said that he'd developed an obsession with death and guns, along with a fear of being separated from or killed by his father. A meeting was set up between the school and Arthur's father, Thomas, and Arthur was actually seen by a number of medical professionals, but nothing came of it. And then the lockdown hit and Arthur was forced to spend all his time with his dad and Emma. In April 2020, Arthur's grandmother noticed bruises on his back, and she actually asked Thomas to leave Arthur with her instead of taking him back to Emma's, but he refused, and this actually prompted a call to social services. The next day, a social worker visited the house and the bruises were explained away as being caused by a fight with Emma's son. The social worker concluded that Arthur was happy and safe and that there were no safeguarding issues. In actual fact, Emma had coached the boys on how to lie to professionals and told them that there'd be consequences if they told the truth. This incident was actually reported again by Arthur's uncle, but wasn't followed up. Over the next few weeks, the abuse against Arthur escalated. He was often forced to stand in the hallway facing a wall for hours on end, and Emma would often record him when he was upset and send the clips to his father, Thomas. In these clips, Arthur could be heard saying "no one loves me," as well as crying for his grandmother and uncle. I'll play one of the clips now, just a trigger warning again because it is hard to listen to. In June 2020, cameras were set up inside the home by Emma to make sure Arthur complied with his punishments. He was also moved from one of the upstairs bedrooms and forced to sleep on the living room floor. On these recordings, Arthur could be seen standing in the hallway facing the wall while the rest of the family enjoyed a takeaway. And on another occasion, Thomas and Emma were seen enjoying an ice cream on a scorching hot day, while Arthur was forced to wear a fleecy onesie that he wasn't allowed to take off. Between the 12th and 14th of June, Arthur actually spent a total of 35 hours standing in that hallway facing the wall. And on June 15th, he was taken with Emma to her hairdresser's house, where she forced him to stand in the doorway the entire time they were there. When Thomas arrived to pick them up, Arthur collapsed in the doorway and wasn't helped by either of them. That night, Thomas hit Arthur around the legs with a belt repeatedly and then told Emma to just end him. The next day, Emma sent Thomas a photo of his dying son and then called 999. Footage from that day showed that Arthur was incredibly weak and exhausted. He couldn't even pick his bedding up off the living room floor. Emma had attempted to poison Arthur with salt in the bathroom, and she'd then attacked him in the hallway upstairs. She violently shook Arthur and then slammed his head against the floor multiple times, resulting in a fatal brain injury. She told paramedics when they arrived that his injuries were self-inflicted and that he'd actually banged his own head on the floor 5 times. Arthur was found to have over 130 bruises on his head and body. He was severely malnourished, underweight, and his gums were bleeding. Despite the hospital's best efforts, they couldn't save him, and Arthur passed away at 1 a.m. the next day at Birmingham Children's Hospital. Emma and Thomas were arrested on suspicion of murder, and an investigation began, with police trawling through hours of CCTV footage, as well as audio clips and messages on both of their phones. The evidence clearly illustrated the systematic cruelty inflicted on Arthur. Arthur's death was caused by a head trauma inflicted on him by an adult, and the most likely way this had happened was from him being violently shaken and having his head repeatedly slammed against a hard surface. Hospital tests also revealed a really high level of salt in Arthur's system, and a specialist kidney consultant said that for the levels to be that high, he either had to have consumed 6 tablespoons of salt on the day that he was fatally injured, or that his food and water was being contaminated over a long period of time. The trial of Emma Tustin and Thomas Hughes began in October 2021, and the presiding judge, Mr. Justice Mark Wall, described it as one of the most distressing and disturbing cases he's ever had to work on. In December 2021, Emma Tustin was found guilty of the murder of Arthur and sentenced to life with a minimum of 29 years. She's being held at HMP Peterborough. Arthur's father, Thomas Hughes, was convicted of manslaughter and originally given a sentence of 21 years, but this was increased in July 2022 to 24 years, and he's being held at HMP Wakefield. A review into Arthur's death showed that Child Protective Services had been involved in his life since 2018 and had repeatedly not intervened to help him. A panel have now put in place recommendations to improve safeguarding children in Solihull and Bradford, but sadly it comes too late for Arthur.
What? Nothing there, mate. Nothing there. What? There's nothing there.
This little girl was kidnapped in 2018 and has just been found. On the 25th of October 2018, 4-year-old Aranza Lopez was on a supervised visit with her biological mum. Her mum, Esmeralda, was being investigated over abuse allegations, so Aranza was actually in foster care at the time. It was arranged that the pair would have a supervised visit at a Washington shopping centre. However, during the visit, Esmeralda requested to take Aranza to the toilets and used the opportunity to snatch the little girl in a stolen vehicle. The FBI were notified and a huge search for Aranza and even advertised a $10,000 reward. It wasn't until a year later that Esmeralda was found and arrested, but there was still no sign of the little girl. That was until last month. She was recovered by Mexican authorities in February in western Mexico. In 2021, Esmeralda was actually extradited back to Washington State and pled guilty to second-degree kidnapping and robbery. She was sentenced to 20 months in prison. This woman screamed, "I don't want to die," as she was dragged to her death in a horrifying theme park incident. Kelty Byrne was a Canadian student animal trainer and competitive swimmer. She was working at Sealand of the Pacific to earn extra money, and this involved being trained to work with orcas, otherwise known as killer whales. In controversial theme parks such as Sealand of the Pacific and SeaWorld, huge animals are either bred in captivity or traumatically captured and ripped apart from their families and natural habitats for humans' entertainment. On February the 20th, 1991, Kelty was working a shift and 3 whales were in one of the pools, including the infamous Tilikum. In a horrific turn of events, Kelty accidentally slipped and fell into the whale pool and attempted to grab onto the edge and save herself. However, before she could do so, she was grabbed by one of the whales that dragged her into the pool. The three whales then began throwing Kelty around, with many speculating that they may have simply thought this was a game. Others theorised that the whales were so traumatised and angered by their lives in tiny little pools that they took it out on Kelty. She was dragged under the water and then back up, screaming, "I don't want to die." After this horrific ordeal, she eventually drowned. It's reported that she was absolutely covered in bruises, was completely battered, and also covered in teeth marks. If I didn't know this was a true crime case, I would think it was a disturbing horror film. On the morning of the 7th of October 2022, a barefoot woman was running around Excelsior Springs, Missouri, bashing on people's doors. Witnesses describe her looking like she came straight from a horror film, and she was calling for help. She'd been beaten, held captive, and SA'd for weeks. The woman was a shocking sight. She was covered in injuries and was wearing a bin bag. Disturbingly, she was gasping for breath as she had a very tight metal collar locked round her neck. It was a nurse who opened the door to her and let her come in. The nurse started to call police, and at this point the woman panicked. She warned her that the captor would kill her and claimed that he had killed her two friends. When police got there, the woman explained that a man called Timothy had captured her the month prior. He'd been holding her hostage this whole time. She said he'd been keeping her locked in the basement and had been SAing her. Disturbingly, she told police that he actually had a young son who lived at the house with him. When Timothy had taken his young son to school the one day, she used it as her opportunity to escape. Police made their way to the home of 39-year-old Timothy Haslett Jr. and found the property did in fact have a basement like the woman described. Timothy was arrested and is facing 9 charges, including first-degree kidnapping. He's being held on a $3 million bond and faces 5 life sentences. Before his arrest, police were actually called to his address 3 times. Twice they were asked to do welfare checks, and this was from an employer and also family members. Police have searched his home with cadaver dogs and they haven't yet released what they know. This is one of the most disgusting and evil cases I've heard of recently. On the 7th of December 2017, teacher Thelma Boinville was desperately trying to make some extra money. She was doing a cleaning job to earn extra money for her family, and the job suited her as her 8-year-old could come along and play while she worked. This was really handy as it meant she didn't have to fork out for childcare. She set out cleaning some holiday homes on the day in question, and her daughter waited in the car. The spot was a lovely scenic place called Kelky Beach. However, instead of walking in on a normal holiday rental to clean, she walked into a nightmare. Stephen Brown and his girlfriend Hayley Dangerand were in the middle of robbing the place. They were scouring through drawers and wardrobes, hunting for valuables to steal. With Thelma walking in, their plan had been foiled. They decided they needed to dispose of their only witness. The evil pair tied up the mother, whose daughter waited unsuspectingly in the car outside. They used a machete, a knife, and a hammer to murder the innocent woman. But the horror was far from over. They exited the holiday home and came across Thelma's young daughter waiting in the car. They callously told the young girl, "We killed your mum," and then bound her up and gagged her. Sickeningly, they then took the 8-year-old into the home where they'd killed her mum and left her there tied up. The 2 Australian tourists who were renting the holiday home then came back and found the crime scene. The 2 killers were tracked down hours later in Thelma's car, which they'd stolen and driven off in. Hayley was actually wearing her victim's earrings at the time. They actually begged for the officers to just shoot them and end their lives, but they wouldn't get away that easily. Thelma's husband Kevin wasn't actually allowed to see his wife's body due to the extent of her injuries. The autopsy revealed that she'd fought for her life, with many defensive wounds indicating a struggle. Since the murder, Stephen and Hayley have both tried to blame each other. Stephen was found guilty of second-degree murder and apparently showed no emotion as the verdict was read out. Hayley is currently awaiting trial.